last time I spoke to Dave Starbuck a couple of years ago, we did a presentation, an interview, and the title of it was Meltdown. And he was effectively saying that UK PLC was going into meltdown. And over the last couple of years, as it turns out, he's been pretty much right. That is exactly what has happened. It's happened in a sort of a slow, steady way, but it's definitely happening. We then in 2009 had this famous speech by Daniel Hannan, the Conservative MEP, where he was saying in terms of financial robustness, Britain was down there with Pakistan and Hungary, which are countries where the IMF had already been called in. And he was claiming that Britain was by far the worst of the European countries, which is interesting given what later happened with Greece. We then had the 2009 budget where Britain's debt was predicted to reach 1.4 trillion, which is an absolutely staggering figure that would apparently equate to something like 80% of the nation's economy. However, what did happen in that budget is that the economy was predicted to grow again in late 2009 and then to rebound sharply by 2011. So in other words, during 2010 it would get so much better. In fact, in January 2010, the government had predicted that there would be a 2.8 billion repayment. That's during the month of January. Unfortunately, though, what happened, instead of that happening, the government had to borrow 4.3 billion. Now, that's a big difference in a month. And that's also the first time that the British government have ever had to borrow money in the month of January since records began. In fact, in early 2010, the government were borrowing the equivalent of £270,000 per minute. It's not looking good. And what I want to emphasise is those figures that I've just given you are all from the mainstream media. They are mainstream figures. So in other words, we know what the mainstream media is saying. Today what we're going to be looking at, we're going to be finding out what the antithesis, or what some would say the sworn enemy of the mainstream media, has to say. Now, what a lot of people don't know about the person I'm going to be speaking to today is that he was formerly in the RAF. So I'd like to introduce you to, ladies and gentlemen, former squadron leader, Mr. Dave Starbuck. Hi, Dave.
How do you do? Very nice. Nice to see you again.
Very nice to see you too. Yeah, how have you been doing then over the last couple of years?
Very well, very well.
Yeah.
I'm still fighting the
good
war
fight,
effort.
Yeah. The good fight, yeah, a different kind of war.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very much a war nonetheless. Just going back for a moment to the Daniel Hannan speech, which I mentioned before, I want to pick up just on one quote first of all that was largely ignored by the mainstream media, this particular one, and that's where he says that the government is, quote, willfully worsening the situation and wantonly spending what little we have left. I mean, from an alternative media perspective, that could be taken to mean that they're doing it on purpose.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They have been for years. But people are only just beginning to realise.
Yeah.
It's only when something affects a person directly, and they, as you say, there's something rotten in the state of Denmark here. It's only when it affects them directly. If they just read about it in the newspaper, they think, ooh, that's bad, it's a shame. When a person loses a job, they can't pay the mortgage, they have the house repossessed, or they get entangled with what I call the medical mafia, then they realise there is something wrong.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been through, I mean, last time we were talking about this, where we've been through, people weren't waking up for the false flags, they weren't waking up for the chemtrails, they weren't waking up for, all manner of different things which maybe they should have been waking up, but somehow the chicanery and the political skullduggery of the politicians
Yes.
in relation to the economy, and there's other things like MPs' expenses and things like that, which have, I suppose, helped wake people. But this time, for this kind of economic thing, people are waking up then.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt.
In terms of the politicians, this is a purposeful thing. They've known about it. We were going in this direction for years. They were creating a financial crash. Do you think that this is really pushing us into a fascist European superstate?
I think we're already in one.
Yeah.
We already live in a police state, a dictatorship.
Well, I mean, I've got a few figures here actually, just that I was going to mention. I was just finding these out recently. I mean, it does very much seem to be that way. I mean, the UK has less than 1% of the world's population, but 20% of the world's CCTV cameras, there's apparently 4.5 million CCTV cameras in the UK, and that's one for every 14 people. So and there's also been a restriction of people's personal freedoms, hasn't there? Would you say that?
That's an understatement. An understatement. You can get fined for dropping a cigarette end. One of my chief northeastern correspondent, she has quite a few tales to tell. They have these not litter scouts. I call them litter police. They see you drop a piece of litter, they can fine you, and if you don't pay it, they can arrest you. The day's not far away. You could be fined for breaking wind.
Yeah. Well, you know, some of these CCTV cameras in the northeast actually speak back to you now, don't they?
I don't know.
Oh yeah, they've got a voice. You know, the people that are behind the CCTV cameras actually speak to you and tell you things. I mean, that's quite disturbing in itself. And then, of course, we've had the smoking ban, haven't we, in pubs and things like that, which was, yeah.
If I may, I'll tell you a little story about smoking. I'll come to the pubs in a few moments. Many years ago, not long after I left school, I worked in a furniture shop. And in those days, furniture used to get scratched and so forth, and they had a freelance French polisher, right? And he used to, touch where it had been scratched. And one day I was speaking to him, and I'm going back 1952, 53, and we're on about smoking, and he said he once packed up smoking, and he started getting respiratory problems, and he went to see his doctor. And his doctor told him to start smoking again, because when he started smoking, all the fluid it would bring up on his chest. If any doctor said that today, they'd be struck off the list. Now, on about smoking, in Birmingham alone, which I don't live far from, as you know, although I spend most of my time in Spain, they're closing an average of 8 pubs a week. That is in Birmingham alone. Mark my words, Gray, in 2 years there won't be any pubs. And you can put that down to the smoking ban. In Spain, they more or less told Brussels to, you know what, they don't take any, because it was costing them too much money. But from a social aspect, there's very few places you go socially. Okay, I accept the concept that have non-smoking areas, but now they're on about banning it, smoking outside public buildings, bus stops, everything. It's not a case of a police state is coming, it's already arrived, and it's been here some time, but it's so subtle, to use my northeastern correspondence parlance, they're creeping up in slippers. And I think that's a very apt expression.
Or boiling a frog where the frog doesn't, jump out if it's too hot, not if it's gradually. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. So you think the pubs really, in terms of public meeting, they don't want people to meet and congregate, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially for rural areas, pubs are the hub of the community, aren't they? You know, you destroy the community in some ways. Now, last time we spoke, so we were looking at ways in which people. There's an economic crash. The government, some people would say, you've said they're engineering it. They know what's going on.
Yes.
Last time we spoke, we tried to talk about ways we can protect ourselves from that.
Yes.
And you predicted that gold was a good investment at that time.
Yes.
In these interesting times, if the pound crashes, etc., what do we do with our money? You were saying put it into gold. Now, I have to say that I have read a couple of really interesting articles recently from well-respected alternative news sites,
yes,
which are basically saying, well, I'll give you a quote just to sum up what they are saying, and this is a direct quote. Gold is just another scam to liquidate middle-class wealth. The gold price will rise for a while, and when enough middle-class people in the West have put enough money in, you know who, and I assume by you know who they mean, the people at the top, the Rothschilds or whoever, will crash the price in order to destroy the money trapped in it. What do you say to that?
I'll be quite honest, I don't really know, but gold, apart from love and land, gold is the only thing that lasts, and it's been for thousands of years. Since you mentioned gold, in Spain, this is published on the Costa del Sol, in English. There's full-page adverts. Look at that. Wanted gold coins.
Yeah, so I think this is just to show the cash paid immediately for unwanted, or even broken jewellery, diamonds, watches, etc. So yeah, we've had similar things in this country. If you watch, the television as well, at certain times, there's adverts for gold. I mean, there's another advert there actually on the page.
Oh, there's about
the old gold company. Yeah,
about 10. This is in Spain.
Yeah.
This is in Spain.
Yeah, but that doesn't stop the fact that the powers that be could crash gold, couldn't they?
In theory. But often the best laid plans of mice and men will often go astray. So,
Yeah. I mean, even if they did crash it, maybe that'd be a good time to buy gold if they crashed it, maybe. But you're saying they won't crash it?
I can't see it personally.
You can't see it personally?
Since time immemorial, gold has been the principal.
So are you still saying that gold is a good investment?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, all right, okay. I mean, the government, the only problem with that is if, the government, like they have done in the past, if they bring all the gold in sort of thing. I mean, that could happen, wouldn't it, theoretically?
Theoretically, but they did it in 1914. Well, they tried in 1914, just after the First World War. I think it was 6th or 7th of April. And if you wanted to draw your money out of the bank, previously you could draw it out in gold, in sovereigns, half sovereigns, whatever. But after then, you could only get a piece of paper.
Oh, but didn't they actually say that people holding personal gold was illegal?
No, that was in Canada and in America.
In America, right, okay.
In 1933, in Canada, everybody holding gold had to sell it to the government,
Right, okay.
And
that could happen again, couldn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, unless you could prove it was antique. In theory, it could. And sometime later, a few weeks later, exactly the same thing happened in America at the height. Pardon me, at the height of the Depression. They had to sell their gold compulsory, and if they didn't, and they were caught, they could be fined $10,000 and face up to 10 years in prison, unless they could prove it was antique.
Okay,
But very sensible people hung on to it.
There's there's different theories on that. Obviously, you're saying it's a good thing. What about property? What do you think about property?
Property. Yeah. I predicted years ago that the bubble would burst on that, and since you mentioned property, I know it's bad in this country, but it's much worse in Spain. In Marbella alone, this is one of the newspapers, there's 70 houses every week being repossessed. And
that's in one town?
Oh yeah, that's only in Marbella.
Yeah.
I do concede Spain is a big country, and every month in Marbella there's about 600 houses up for sale at nearly half the price, and they're still having a job to sell them. So it, and I think, I don't know, I mentioned on the last presentation, one of my correspondents in Florida, well, American, in Florida there's some real estate agent, this was a couple of years ago, and if you buy a house, you get one free.
Oh, I've not heard of that. That's amazing.
Yeah. The house you get free is not as expensive as the one you buy.
But you'd never thought, you get that at the supermarket, you don't get for groceries and things.
A tin of beans free with every...
tin of beans.
But not a damn house.
Not a house, no, it's very unusual, isn't it? Yeah, wow, I mean, that's just going to show maybe how bad things are getting at there.
Now, while we're on the topic of property, by the way, as I say, in Spain, it takes 3 years to sell a house. And everywhere you go, you see flats, apartments and villas to rent. And I share an apartment, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a lounge as big as this, and a kitchen and a hall and a balcony facing the sun for €450 a month, which works out about £56 each per week.
It's cheap, isn't it? Yeah. For that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you can understand why I like to spend a lot of time in Spain.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Just moving out of Europe for a second though, what do you make of the situation in Dubai? I mean, how does that fit in the crash of that?
Dubai is equally as bad, with especially with British expats. There are about 120,000 expats have gone out there hoping to find a land flowing with milk and honey, and they bought property with mortgages and so forth. And what it does not tell you on the mainstream media, which I know a few people have been to Dubai, the police have a big problem, and I'll tell you what this problem is. But if you fall behind with your mortgage in Dubai, they put you in jail. So people, not the credit crunch and everything, people who can't pay the mortgages, they don't fancy going to jail in an Arab country. So they get what belongings they can together, put them in the car, drive to the airport, and get on a plane to the UK or wherever it is they belong, and they leave the car in the car park, and the police have got a full-time job shifting all the cars.
Is it that bad out there then?
Yes.
Oh God! I mean, we've had Greece since then as well, haven't we? The whole of the eurozone.
It's collapsing like a house of cards.
Yeah. I mean, as we said last time, meltdown. But just changing the topic really. I was listening to the other day of your presentation with Dean Warwick. There's
Yes.
certain things relating to Bible phrases in there which are very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But it jolted my memory with the Lockerbie thing. You know, he was talking about the Lockerbie, the plane was shot down, this kind of thing. Fascinating presentation. But over the last few years, since we last spoke, there's been a number of similar kind of incidents. We've had the Air France one that was coming from Brazil to France. We've had a recent one with, or one that happened in the last couple of years from Ethiopian Airlines.
Yes.
What's your view on these kind of things? Do you think it's the same thing that happened with Lockerbie or with these?
Well, every time, just before I answer your question, Gray, about 30 years ago, I was travelling on the train to London to try and get one of my books published. And I got in conversation with a Finnish pilot. And he used to come to London to go to the Science Museum in South Kensington. And we got talking, and one thing led to another. And he said 98% of air accidents are caused by the crew. Now, this may or may not be the case, but since then, as you know, they've got these EMF weapons they can point at the plane. All the electrical equipment goes and the plane just falls out the sky like a stone. Now, I'm always suspicious when a plane crashes on takeoff or it crashes on landing, because I know these are the most vulnerable times. A few weeks ago on the mainstream media, it mentioned this Boeing 777 that the pilot had to crash land because when it was coming into land, both engines stopped, the fuel. After the inquest or the investigation, they said that it was due to ice or something like that. Now, the pilot, it was going pretty fast, so the pilot, he lowered the flaps, and I don't know whether there's any flyers watching, but when he lowered the flaps on wings, that slows the aircraft down. But in so doing, it loses height, and it lost height, and he knew he couldn't make it to the runway, so he put the flaps back in, and he crash landed before he got to the runway. That pilot should have got a George Medal for such quick thinking, He's since resigned from British Airways and gone to a safer airline, and I don't blame him. Now, that could have been what they said at the investigation, but also when a crash like this, I'd often think I'd give £50 to look at the passenger list, because once upon a time, they just hit one person. Now, if there's anybody that's incurred the displeasure of the Illuminati or whatever, they'll just take the plane, Uncle Tom Cobley and all. And on a personal note, the last time I went to, when I go to Spain, I go via Gibraltar, and it was terrible. It wasn't a very nice day, and a correspondent I have in Spain, she said, well, you'll have to be prepared for it to be diverted to Malaga. I said, well, it's no big problem, and to lay a coach on and so forth. And the pilot did announce, he said, on Gibraltar, towards Gibraltar, there's quite a lot of turbulence, so we may have to be diverted to Malaga. Anyhow, when we got to Malaga, he decided to carry on to Gibraltar, right? And we did run off. We ran into real severe turbulence, and I mean, I'm used to it. I thought, well, as long as he gets it down in one piece. And I was reading a book, and it was an Airbus 320, which is quite a big aircraft, but it was being blown around the sky like a leaf. And anyway, eventually it came in, and I don't know anybody knows Gibraltar, but the runway, it just right out into the sea. Yeah. There's only one. From both ends, and it came in. It got it down, and it came down with a real bump right at at the end, and just before it reverse throttle to put to slow it down, and it came down with a bump, and I thought to myself, I hope he hasn't burst a tyre on that, because if it bursts a tyre on it, port or starboard, the aircraft usually veers to the right or the left. Now, it's okay at a big airport like Manchester, you can go onto the grass, but there it'd go into the drink. Anyhow, I got it down on one piece, and all the passengers, they applauded,
Yeah.
And next to me there was this poor Chinese woman with her husband.
Yeah.
Got his arm around her, and she said, "Did you hear everybody praying?" I said, "No, I was busy reading my book."
Yeah.
And they all applauded him. If I'd have been his commanding officer, I'd have had him court-martialed.
Yeah.
It's all right if he had an airplane on his own, but there were no about 200 people on that plane.
Yeah.
When he had a chance to land it in Malaga, where it was safe to.
Yeah.
I'm covering this at New Horizons on dangerous skies. But in answer to your question,
In terms of, yeah, I mean,
it stinks.
Yeah.
It stinks.